Thought Leader Interview Series. We are live from ASU GSV Summit in Salt Lake City, and wanted to welcome our next guest, which is Matthew Pittinsky, who has been in this field for a long time, first as a co-founder of Blackboard, and more recently as a founder of Parchment, CEO of working on credentials and the future of that space. So Matthew, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And just a quick reminder, I know some people have stuck with us for the whole series here, but for those who haven't, we are going to, I'll chat with Matt here, and we'll then open it up at the end in about 20 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So if you have one, keep in mind you can use the hand icon to signal that you'd like to ask a question later. So Matthew, there's, you, as I mentioned, you've been in this field for a long time and seen a lot of evolution and been part of that. But I guess I wanted to just ask you, since it's coming up on this, and I know you're doing something here, a fireside chat at this event about the 20-year anniversary of Blackboard. I guess going back for a second, for some people, were probably in the field back then, some people weren't. Remind us, like, how did you even get the idea to do a learning management system, which was kind of a new thing?
Right.
Hard to believe. Learning management systems was the disruption.
It is hard to believe. I mean, this is 1997 when we started Blackboard.
Sure.
Also, very importantly, in 1997 was the Instructional Management Systems Project, the IMS project, which was a group of universities beginning to think about academic computing and technology standards.
Standards.
Yes. Yeah. So both have existed at the same time. But back then, software was installed on premise. Academic computing was pretty much a cart with an overhead projector, PowerPoint slides. And it just struck me as odd that universities were spending millions of dollars on their administrative computing. They were wiring up the dorms. This was before wireless. So the motto was a port per pillow. And yet faculty don't know HTML. They don't know how to program. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to use the technology for teaching and learning? And the answer is you have to make it really easy for the typical instructor to be able to bring their course online and then manage it online. So it wasn't really about distance learning. I don't think we had this big disruptive sort of vision. What we were trying to do is just make it obscenely easy for a professor to create a course website. And then we hoped that would be like a pebble in a pond and have a ripple effect. Once instruction was supported online, it could move completely online. You could begin to bring in different kinds of instructional tools. You could see how that could open up more opportunities over
time. As a friendly devil's advocate is watching this space, I know that you'll have a great amount of data, just like any tech company, or you did being more active at Blackboard, of like who's using what and all the tools. And there are many tools in Blackboard, as people probably, I'm sure people in our audience, if they're at a college, they have used it on some level, either as an administrator, as a professor, or both. And a lot of the tools don't get used. Mm-hmm. I guess, was this ever a concern about, there's all the idea that, they could change learning or hopefully improve, I'm sure, learning, but it takes the professor to actually go in and do something different. Has this ever been a concern about the low level or the relatively low number of features that are used on average and it's not just Blackboard, it's any of the
so the answer is, and this may surprise you, I don't have that concern.
Okay.
Let me say up front, as you mentioned, I'm not affiliated with Blackboard anymore.
Right.
And I wouldn't want anyone to take any comment I make and somehow attribute that to Blackboard. No, certainly Blackboard would not.
It gives you a good
if you're
perspective.
Watching Blackboard, I didn't do it.
Okay.
For two reasons. First, my belief is that a learning management system is like an operating system for education. And the way that I thought about it was that there's 20% of functionality tools that 80% of faculty care about and use. Discussion boards, chat tools, a grading engine.
The grade book.
The grade book, certain parts of quizzing. And then there's the 80% of tools that only 20% of faculty care about because they're specific to a particular discipline. They're specific to a particular pedagogical approach. If you're using e-portfolios and creative arts versus whatever the examples may be, simulation-based learning. And so my hope and dream 20 years later is that we could walk into a university, open up a course website, and see that while you could recognize that there's a kind of off-the-shelf or industry standard platform behind it, the actual learning environment is very distinct to that faculty member what they're trying to accomplish in the particular tools. So the idea that there are a number of tools that are not relevant to any one faculty member, to me, is not at all. Just as the App Store of Apple has all sorts of stuff I don't care about on my iPhone. Now, you still have to think about, how do I make that an easy-to-use experience, not cluttering up the environment where a sociology professor is seeing a push to use a math lab tool. That's one reason. The second reason is, look, faculty's job are teaching. Their job is not to be systems integrators. And I always had a very humble and modest view to say, if all we're helping them do is put a syllabus online, if all that we're helping them to do is use the discussion board, I am a believer that over the long haul, you're slow boiling the frog, or the professor is the frog. In that analogy, I apologize, professors. But just the act of starting to use technology in their classroom, I really do believe causes them to begin to think differently about their pedagogy, begins to think differently about what they're trying to accomplish. And yes, it may not be evident in the time scale of 2 or 3 or 4 years, or the multiple of that in semesters, but I really do believe that they can be a relatively uninspirational first user, but it's just a bug. You can't help but begin, especially as students push you in that direction. So sorry, long answer to a short question, but.
So you recently wrote a blog post that you put up on your website, but we actually on EdSurge ran a sort of abridged version for our readers, and you had advice for EdTech people, starting a company maybe today in today's landscape, and especially if they want to serve a college community. One of the advice in there that I was struck by was that you were saying, don't get too close to the academic core, or when you get close to the academic core,
to the instructional core.
To the instructional core, excuse me. Say a little bit more about that, about why that would be.
Yeah, that was the one that I was most nervous to write about, especially with the EdSurge community and with this group. If you step back, in most industries, if you could figure out what's the core purpose of that organization, what's really driving the ROI of that organization, and make it better through technology, that's what you are inspired to do, and that's what you're going to be able to extract the most rent from a revenue and business perspective.
Sure.
And look, most education entrepreneurs are socially motivated and they want to make that difference. My point was, though, two things. One is, it's just a very fraught position to be in. Education is very political. The purpose of education is not singular, it's multiple. And you've got a number of different stakeholders in terms of faculty and parents and students and the university faculty and the administration. And so the closer you get to being the actual platform for the delivery of instruction, you often will tend to communicate that you can drive learning outcomes, that my product increases math comprehension by A, B, or C. And I just don't believe it. I don't believe that educational research is a question like, I use the example of, it's not like taking statins to lower your cholesterol.
Which we know works, I guess.
Right. It's tautological or determinate, or whatever the right phrase is. You know the English language better than I do. It really is, under what conditions does it work? So the closer you get to the instructional core, the closer you get to the political crosshairs of these different stakeholders that are involved, the more you tend to overstate and overhype your actual impact on instruction. The real question is, under what conditions do your technologies work? That's the mature conversation to have, which means that you're ultimately about helping, not doing. We help teachers teach math. We help personalize education. Parchment helps turn credentials into opportunities. Blackboard helps turn the internet into a powerful environment for teaching and learning. I was trying to remember our tagline. Now, the copywriters always hate help because it's this like squishy word that weakens the punch. But that's that. And I use the example of Pearson, which is a great company. I say this in admiration. But once upon a time, Pearson was not one brand across, but lots of different brands. Right? All Simon & Schuster, all the different imprints, Madison Wesley. And they began to put all their brands into one, Pearson, and get very deep into the instructional process and make very strong statements about the value they were going to deliver in that instructional process. And I think both the ubiquity of Pearson in the educational process, now that they were one brand, everyone realized everything they did. And I think that direct role, instead of being an enabler, being a deliverer, I think that's a tough position to be in. So my advice is, there's a lot of impact you can have by helping teachers, by maintaining their centrality in the process, by having that humility in how you phrase yourself, and by avoiding all of the scary things that can happen if you try to really sign up to deliver in some sort of statin way, teaching and learning outcomes. So I'll take the hate mail now, but that's my belief, and I'm sticking with it.
I have one other question about the LMS space broadly before we move on to some of the more recent work you've been doing. And that is, I guess, because you've been in this so long, I can't help but ask, is there anything that has almost, that has kind of disappointed you in the way things have evolved, or maybe it's not, or surprised you about how things have changed back when you had this kind of, vision for what you hoped would happen versus what actually happened? Is there anything that maybe it could be surprised you most? But
yeah, I mean, and I don't want to be like the curmudgeon 20 years ago. I mean, first up, as you know, I'm usually the outlier on a panel when people say, is education going to change X in 5 years? I'm always the one who says no. Like, I tend to think 10, 15 years. I say, even with that, 20 years later, in 1998, we talked about the flipped classroom. In 1998, we talked about Star Faculty teaching global audiences. What's the move now?
Right.
So I would say even I am surprised by the slow pace by which, now, it feels fast if you're the MOOC revolution. There's no MOOC revolution. Like, literally, there's a direct line between, that and Fathom and University Alliance and Hungry Minds, and
you're talking some deep tracks for people who don't know. But there were some
there's a direct line to these things. It just took that long to manifest itself. So I would say, even as someone who tends to measure the timescale of change in higher education in the 10-year increments, it still takes a very long time. And I would say I am surprised that learning management systems have not changed as much as they could have, given social, mobile, data-driven algorithms, all the ways in which the general technology world has changed. I'm surprised that learning management systems still roughly look, feel, and taste the way they did back in the day. But that makes me sound like a curmudgeon.
Well, you're welcome to whatever the perspective is. So thank you for sharing that. You made an interesting decision after you left Blackboard immediately. You went an academic route yourself.
Yeah.
Why that choice, and just kind of why that move? And tell a little bit about what you did for those who may not be aware of your bio.
Yeah. So it really is just the thing I would have done if Blackboard hadn't worked out. So literally 4 weeks after starting Blackboard, I took the GREs. That's how confident I was.
Oh, wow. You didn't tell your investors that.
No, we didn't I didn't even know that we were going to get investors. So what I always studied to be and hoped to be was an academic, to be a professor in sociology. So eventually got to the point where it was the right time to leave Blackboard, got my PhD in sociology of education, and then became a tenure track professor at ASU. And did that for a few years. The first summit, though, coincidentally, was where I came across a company that eventually became the basis of Parchment. Couldn't stop thinking about it. And it wasn't from a lack of love of the academic life. It was just even more, I kind of got hooked on the idea of Parchment. And so eventually jumped back into EdTech.
And I guess that is an interesting perspective, having been now a faculty member and an entrepreneur. Could you speak to that dual experience? I mean, do you feel like you have a better, because as you know well, professors often are quite skeptical of for-profit companies, and there's this kind of clash of cultures that it feels like often. Do you have any advice for either side on how to better communicate or understand each other? Have you been in both?
I think it's just universal disarmament. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. This bright line between you're a vendor and I'm an academic institution, and by definition you are corrupt and self-interested, and I'm virtuous. And if Tool A was built by another university and they came to talk to me about it, we'd be collaborating. And if Tool A is built by someone who's a for-profit business, then it's the devil. That really exists. It's incredibly. You go to the exhibit hall, don't you dare present during the program, because if you present it in the program, you're corrupting the integrity of what we're doing at pick your university association. It's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. In no other industry would. I mean, I am a CEO. So if I was a CEO, I am a CEO. If the CEO of Tableau was willing to come visit me and talk about data science and data and where it's going, I wouldn't think you're trying to sell me Tableau licenses. I know you're trying to sell me Tableau license. I'd be thinking, holy cow, it's the CEO of Tableau. Like, let me ask you 1,000 questions, get 15 great ideas, and definitely show me the 5 new things that are coming out. Like, that's the best way to run my organization. So I say it's universal disarmament because part of why that behavior has developed is really crude entrepreneurs that don't take the time to understand the education language, who overstate the value proposition of what they're doing, who don't understand education. Education is a different market. That's part of the inspiration of the blog post, is to try to identify a few of the ways in which I think education is different and make that very clear. So I think it's self-inflicted by many entrepreneurs,
right?
But at the same time, university and association leaders could take the time and decide there are some who get it and some who don't, and we're not being unfair to privilege those who get it and treat them as part of the community. Because that's how we're going to drive innovation.
Sounds like some sort of Camp David retreat is needed,
yes,
or something to have the two sides meet. So you mentioned Parchment, and I'll ask a question about that, and very soon we're going to get to the audience questions as well. So folks that have them out there, you can press the icon, the hand icon. I think it's been interesting. I've talked to you about this project over a couple of years, and it seems like the elevator pitch for Parchment is, it seems like, about the transcript and reinventing what that means. Do you feel like, what do you think is the biggest challenge now, as far as there seems to be, obviously one of the tracks here at this event is now about, understanding that space, and there seems to be a lot of energy these days in that area. Do you feel like, I guess maybe I think people will probably understand or be aware kind of what you're doing, but what's next? What are you excited about fast forwarding through now that you've kind of established Parchment? What is next as far as the way you see things changing for transcripts or credentials?
Right. I love the question because we're still trying to do like today.
Let's just skip the part where you built Parchment and go forward.
So first off, I should use this. I'm not a co-founder of Parchment. We have 3 great co-founders that I'd love to celebrate in case they see this. I'm sure they know I said that. So first thing is, you focused on the transcript. One key piece of what's next is bringing all the different types of credentials that universities issue into the digital age. So that's the certificate and the diploma, as well as the transcript. And obviously, micro-credentialing has been a very active area as well.
You see that as having is that got staying power, micro-credentials?
I do. I think there's a role for the formative process on your way to a summative degree, having clear milestones credentialized for a bunch of different reasons. At the same time, I still think there's a lot of value in the summative credential, the academic transcript, the certificate, and the diploma. And there's still, the reason why I smile when you say what's next is just getting rid of paper. Just take transcripts. Typical transfer, student attends multiple colleges, maybe has to join military transcript. International students crossing national boundaries. There is so much cost and friction and lost credit and frustration that exists in our higher ed system just getting rid of paper transcripts, making them data, making them exchangeable. Of course, we are also inspired to take advantage of digital and innovate the credential, make the transcript clickable, make the extend it with comprehensive information like competency or experiential information, make it visual for certain kind of audiences that don't want to read a ledger transcript like an employer. They just want certain data elements and they want to make it really easy to access them. To make your diploma available to post on Facebook and click back for verification. Later on, I'm going to be moderating a panel on the blockchain and, potentially truly making the credential independent of the issuer by recording the issuing on the blockchain. So there's I would say a lot of the future is innovating the credential to make it more informative and actionable for the learner, for the receiver, the employer, the admissions office, the licensing board. But I don't want to lose sight of the first phase, which is we got to get rid of paper. We have to make this stuff data, and we have to allow the student mobility that's happening across a very decentralized higher ed system happen much more efficiently. So that still tends to be most of what keeps us up at night.
Well, we have a video question that will bring up that person right now from our audience, and others feel free to join us, and there's a time for another one probably after this. So just bear with us here for a second. Somebody's coming up on. Hey, hi, we can hear you. You have a question for Matthew?
Yeah, so just kind of going back to what Matt was talking about in terms of kind of vendors speaking the academic language and that disarmament. What do you think the responsibility of vendors is to engage in research and kind of make that research transparent? So coming from the academic side, like I just kind of a lot of times see vendors as selling snake oil to me, right? Like blowing smoke. And so I just want to see like, whether their product has been validated. So do you think that's a kind of a valid concern from the university's point of view?
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting. It's absolutely a valid concern. That gets again into, not overstating what your product does and spending as much time as the conditions under which the product is successful, whether that's teacher training, whether that's something around the leadership in the school context, whether it's about, the demographic or the level of academic preparation of the student. There's all these contextual factors. That's where the magic happens. The hard part of EdTech is it's just so broad, right? There are teaching and learning applications, there's financial aid applications, all the way to like tuition, income sharing platforms on the financial side. So that responsibility varies across that continuum. But I believe it's so critical not only to do that research, but that's an example where I don't think the best people to promulgate that research is the vendor. The best is an independent organization or your school or university client itself out presenting at different trade shows to kind of spread the word. So I think that's an important part of the disarmament. You have to be responsible in your claims and you have to back them up. But at the same time, you have to be willing to then listen to that and view it as valid information that can inform your decision making.
I think that the challenge often becomes of, on our side, getting the appropriate access to the tool to do kind of validated research beforehand, before implementing it, because a lot of times I know vendors are very protective of, their algorithms or how it's being used or, the beta testing of it. And so I think that's kind of been a challenge from our perspective of, they're just not wanting to kind of hand that over.
Rob, can you say where you're coming? Do you mind sharing where you are coming from?
Oh yeah, so I work at Boise State University.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And Matt, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say that one of the things, and Rob, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
One of the things that you mentioned with vendor relations, I mean, I think some people will remember that Blackboard didn't always have the best reputation, and some of it was a practice about patents at some point in the company's history. And I guess, is there any lesson from that aspect of Blackboard's past? I mean, I think a lot of our readers may remember in some of that. I think in a nutshell, it was kind of a somewhat aggressive stance on kind of pressing Blackboard's patent and suing other companies in some cases. And that was seen, I think, in a lot of academic spaces as evidence, in fact, of a kind of different culture and different and not partnering.
Yeah. Well, I would say first, and again, this is where I want to be careful because there is
I know you're not with Blackboard.
That has a leadership team, and they probably wouldn't appreciate me either endorsing the idea of a negative reputation or refuting it in a different way. I would say, but certainly early on, we were truth, justice, and the American way. We were about using technology to improve teaching and learning, making it obscenely easy for faculty, the level of excitement and passion. Much of it was brand transference to Blackboard. And I'm not sure we necessarily deserved. A lot of what the energy was again what we talked about. I'm thinking differently about my course in teaching as a function of Blackboard as much as it was Blackboard versus WebCT or something else.
Right.
But you're right. There certainly then was a point whereby a combination of market share and pricing and product strategy, and the patent may have been symbolic of that in terms of enforcing intellectual property. That institutions began to say, again, what kind of a partner is this? And think, and my disarmament is about that. It is about, don't think about it as a vendor and as an educational institution. Think about it as a partnership. Be selective. Absolutely be selective. You don't have to treat everybody equally. But there are good actors and there are bad actors, and you lose a lot of value by not being engaged with the good actors. At a trade association, vendors only speak during the vendor track, and then like every other time during the conference, you're not allowed to talk, present ideas, etc. So it's more that kind of thing.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks,
everybody.